I'm Debbie Walsh, and I'm the director of the Center for American Women and Politics at the Eagleton Institute of Politics, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. We are so pleased that so many of you are joining us for this program, and that's probably because you heard about it from some of our wonderful co-sponsors for tonight's event. And you can see a long list of those co-sponsors in your program, and I want to thank them publicly right now for all of their help. As many of you know, tonight's program was made possible by the generous support of the New Jersey legislature for the Senator Wynona Lipman Chair in Women's Political Leadership, which began in 2000. The chair honors the first African-American woman in the New Jersey State Senate who represented Essex County for 27 years in the New Jersey legislature. Over those years, she was often the only woman who served in the New Jersey State Senate, and she became the strongest and the most consistent voice in the legislature for women and minorities. She was the legislature's leading advocate on behalf of children, families, low-income people, small business, and people with AIDS. She tackled issues including employment discrimination, marriage law, child support, sexual assault, domestic violence, and the rights of children. As I said, for many of those years, she was the only woman there, and she was always speaking up for those with the least access to the political process, always alert to the political implications of race and gender. And if you want to read more about Senator Lipman, you can read about her, see her full bio, which is up on our website, and I really encourage you to do that. She was an extraordinary woman, and we are really pleased that we have been able to kind of keep her legacy alive through this program. Through the legislature's support, we have also been able to bring an extraordinary roster of distinguished women to Rutgers to inspire New Jerseyans, and tonight is absolutely no exception. Your program tells you a bit more about that support, and you can go online to learn more about past chairholders. In addition to supporting this lecture series, Lipman Chair Funds support two other programs that are very much in keeping with Senator Lipman's interest in empowering more women to lead. First, grooming potential office holders by providing Senator Lipman scholarships for Essex County residents to attend Ready to Run, COP's bipartisan program to train New Jersey women to run for office. And second, preparing women to take on political leadership by offering Senator Wynona Lipman scholarships to women from community colleges who want to attend New Leadership New Jersey, COP's model initiative to educate and empower the next generation of our state's women's leaders. Community colleges were very important to Senator Lipman, who taught at Essex County College for many years and understood that these institutions are the entry point to higher education for many women, particularly those from challenging backgrounds. We also have a distinguished advisory committee that aids us in implementing the Lipman Chair, and one of the members of that advisory committee is here with us tonight, and I just want to thank her publicly, and that is Alma Saravia, who worked with Wynona Lipman for many years as the executive director of the Commission on Sex Discrimination in the Statutes. Alma, thank you so much. In the years since Senator Lipman's passing, a new generation of African American women leaders have moved into positions of power and influence. Women who unfortunately must still push for progress on some of the very same issues that Senator Lipman addressed, even as they take up new directions and other compelling concerns. One of those fresh voices is our speaker tonight, Congresswoman Donna Edwards, who represents portions of Prince George's and Anne Arundel counties in eastern Maryland. She's a graduate of Wake Forest University and the University of New Hampshire School of Law. She has a great background. It's really diverse, really interesting. Before she entered Congress, this is a great combination of things. She worked on NASA's Space Lab project and was the co-founder and executive director of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, leading the efforts to pass the Violence Against Women Act. She won her House seat in a special election in 2008, and since then has spoken out on behalf of working families, research and development, domestic manufacturing, and infrastructure improvements. She was also the first member of the House to put forward a constitutional amendment to overturn the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. She serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, where she is the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Space. She's also the Democratic co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues, and she chairs the Recruitment Committee for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Now at COP, we frequently talk about the difference women make when they serve in public office, and we relish the opportunity to hear from some of the women who are leaders playing this out on the front lines. We want to hear what they have to say about the difference that women make as policymakers on the agenda and on the way government works. And that's exactly who we have brought here today. And I am delighted to welcome this year's holder of the Senator Wynona Lipman Chair in Women's Political Leadership, Congresswoman Donna Edwards.
Well, thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you, Ruth. It was very great to spend some time with you and with students earlier today. I am so delighted to be here at the Center for Women and American Politics, American Women and Politics. I have to say, earlier when I knew that I was going to be here, I was excited because as a woman who both is in politics and has worked in and around politics for so many years, and who's worked on women's empowerment and issues for so many years, to be here at the center is such a delight because there's not a single one among us who's done any of this work who hasn't relied on the data, the fact sheets, the research, and all of it. And so to be here today, and especially in the name of Wynona Lipman, who was a senator extraordinaire. And I always say that I feel that I walked in the footsteps of Shirley Chisholm and Harriet Tubman and Barbara Jordan, but the reality is that I've also walked in the footsteps without even knowing it of Wynona Lipman. And so it is really quite a delight to be able to be here. Now, I thought earlier as I was talking with a group of students that there are a lot of things about women in politics, and particularly in the Congress, that feel very challenging, both running for and winning a congressional seat, but also serving in a body in which we know that only 18% of its members, in fact, are women. But the challenge doesn't end there. And I know that you heard, some of you did a few weeks ago from our leader, Nancy Pelosi, but I only have to watch her as a young leader and learning to know how important it is to have that kind of mentorship coming into the Congress. And that's what I've been able to experience, and it's looking around at women and learning from them. And so one of those first lessons about women's leadership, and Leader Pelosi says this, is really to know your own power. And to watch her and to learn from her about what it means to know your power and to barrel through even when people are telling you that you can't is more than just a life lesson. Very recently, I had the experience of, through whether it was working on healthcare reform or several other issues, of knowing that the challenge of women's leadership is about making sure that we're in the mix and around the table in the decision-making process so that we can make a difference at that table. And it does make a difference. It means, for example, when you're talking about healthcare reform, that including women's reproductive health care in that overall package is something that might not have happened had it not been for having women at the table. when issues have come up recently. I'm the co-chair of our bipartisan women's caucus, but more importantly for me in terms of my political work, I'm the chair of our Democratic Women's Working Group in the Congress. That's all the Democratic women in the House of Representatives. And we've been trying to figure out not only how do we recruit more women to run for Congress, but what does it mean to speak to the issues and concerns that are important to women every single day when they get up. Things like, what does it mean to go to work but know that you have to leave your child at childcare, at daycare, and how do you pay for that? Things like, what does it mean to go to work at a minimum wage job where you know if you work 40 hours a week at a minimum wage job, then you probably still live in poverty? What does it mean when you work for tipped wages and your tips don't quite add up at the end of the week, and so it becomes difficult to make your rent payment or to pay your utilities because somebody has decided that $2.13 an hour for the last 23 years is acceptable for a tipped minimum wage? And when an overwhelming majority of women are working for these wages and are living on their own, so many women in this country are living in poverty. And in the Congress, we as a group of Democratic women have been trying to figure out how it is that we speak to these needs in women's everyday lives. And of course, all of us bring our life experience in doing that. I was at a community college recently, and I was talking to a young woman who's struggling to go to complete community college to get her degree and to go on. And she also drops her young child off at daycare every week. Her child is an infant, and so that means that in Maryland, where I'm from, she pays about $12,936 a year for childcare for an infant. Her college tuition is about a quarter of that. And so it is true, in fact, that around the country, most women, most families who are paying for child care are actually paying more in child care than they are sometimes in rent, in mortgage, and a whole lot of other expenses. And so that's why it's important as women members of Congress that we're focused on issues that are about improving the economic lives of women. I'd like to think that Senator Lipman would want us focused on the issues that are about improving the lives of women. And so earlier this year, along with Leader Pelosi and Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro and others, we launched the Women's Economic Agenda. And the Women's Economic Agenda focused on very concrete things that are about improving the lives and the economic status of women. Things like equal pay for equal work. Just a couple of weeks ago, we commemorated Equal Pay Day and did that by pointing out that, of course, we hear the statistics, 77 cents on the dollar women make compared to men doing the same job for the same experience. Well, for African American women, it's 64 cents on the dollar. For Latinas, it's 54 cents on the dollar. And so when you think about that, it means that many women have to wait until about April until they get their first paycheck for the year's worth of work. For other women, they have to wait until about the middle of the year before they get their first paycheck for a year's worth of work. It seems somehow that it's unfair and unjust that women should not receive equal pay for equal work, and yet that becomes a battle in the political space. Now, in the Congress, as you know, sometimes things can get a little mixed up, so that it comes to a point that we're having a partisan debate over something that, for most young women in particular, seems pretty simple, a pretty simple concept. And yet we're debating about whether women should be paid equally for a day's worth of work. Now, I want to say to the young women, especially those who are preparing to come out of college, now that is probably the point at which you will be making the closest in your salary to your male counterparts at the very beginning of your career. I remember when I was working in the space program, I was not allowed to ask my colleagues how much they made. In fact, I had to sign a form that said that I wouldn't ask, and if I did ask and I was found out, that I would be fired for asking about the salary. And I think that obviously that was because if I knew, then I might want to negotiate a bigger salary. And so it wasn't quite an accident. And I think today when, as young women are thinking about going out into the workplace, and as more women are breadwinners than we've ever had in our economy, the idea for them in the 21st century that they should not be paid equally for an equal day's work for an equal day's pay does seem rather silly, and yet it's still work that needs to be done. We've launched, as part of this women's economic agenda, as I've described, improving access to quality and affordable childcare. Now, I think about these things as a woman because above everything, I'm a mother. I remember when I was struggling with childcare with my son. And some of you do this drill too, where you take your child to child care, and then when it's time to pick him or her up, you're looking at the clock because you know that every minute over that time means that you're paying overtime. And you're working on a fixed income, and so you know that if you've gone 18 minutes over the clock, not only is your child the sad sack who's waiting for you at the end of that day, but you also are maybe shoveling out $18 or more to pay for the overtime. And I can chuckle about this now, but it wasn't funny then. And for so many women across this country, it's not funny. That's why women have to be at the table. I was thinking about my son as well. For childcare, like many women, you make a decision, and I say women, but families make these decisions too. You make a decision about where you're going to put your child in childcare, and you want it to be safe, but you also need it to be affordable. You want quality, but sometimes you have to sacrifice some things because it's what you can afford. And I did that as a young mother. And I will never forget leaving my child off at a place that I really didn't think was entirely the cleanest place, but it was a nice woman who was taking care of the children. And one day I picked my son up, and he was feeling not very good at all. And then over the course of the night, he ran a fever, and he was getting very sick. In the morning, I knew that he was running a really high fever. I rushed him to the emergency room at the Children's Hospital. After they did a spinal tap, they found out that he had meningitis. And he'd contracted it at the child care facility. It wasn't a licensed facility, but it was what I could afford. And so as a mom, I really struggled with that. And I think even saying it today, I still feel the guilt of that. And I see some of the women in the audience nodding their heads because you know what I'm talking about. And so for families all across this country, the fact that the Congress can't get together on setting a policy that would ensure quality and affordable and accessible childcare for all of our families isn't an issue. It's our lives. And that, again, is why it's important that women are sitting at the table. Not just to raise the conversation, that's kind of one thing, but really to change the policy. I talked about wages earlier, and I had a recent experience with the minimum wage. Anybody ever work for minimum wage? Yeah. Not good. In so many states across this country, if you work for minimum wage, of course, you're probably still living in poverty. And so on the one hand, when we're having political debates about our budget, we have families who are working every single day, and they work for minimum wage. And at the same time, we penalize families by taking away nutrition programs, food assistance, heating assistance, all of the things that actually bring their real wages, if you will, up to or above the poverty line. And so I often wonder with some of my colleagues and want to challenge our colleagues a bit about this, because we cannot on the one hand expect people to work for a wage that is below the poverty line, but on the other hand, take away through our budgets all of the things that would make a difference in their lives. And again, these are things that I think if there were not women members in Congress, these issues would not just be part of the central focus of an agenda for this nation. And we have, I think there are about 62, somebody at the center is going to correct me, 62 women members, Democratic women members of the House, and about 20 Republican members of the House. Glad I got those numbers right. And on the one hand, that seems like a lot, but it really is not at all. And even in our bipartisan Women's Caucus, of which I'm the co-chair, because there are not enough Republican women, it becomes complicated as well to work on issues that we all know are important for us. Let's take the Violence Against Women Act. Now, in last year, at the end of the year, we know that it was virtually a failure, not for good reasons. And it was actually both through voices that were raised in our caucus and around the country highlighting the importance of providing programs and services for domestic violence survivors, important training for law enforcement and judges. But one of the things that went kind of unnoticed is there was a letter that was sort of slipped through. And it was actually authored by myself and my colleague, Jamie Herrera Butler, Republican co-chair of our bipartisan caucus. And all it said didn't cast any aspersions about who was responsible for what, but all it said was that it was important for this nation's women for us to pass a reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. And what that did, because there was a Republican on the letter and a Democrat on the letter, it allowed voices to be heard from all across this country in unison and in advocacy. And then we came back and we actually passed the reauthorization. But you know, there are times when one hand giveth and the other taketh away. I noticed in the recent budget that was submitted and passed by the majority and passed by the House that it actually zeroes out the Office on Violence Against Women. How about that? And we didn't even know that it was happening. And so there then begins, we have to engage in an entire new level of advocacy because our voices have to be heard when you, on the one hand, say we want to authorize the law because of the political pressure, but then you take the money away when you can hide it in a larger budget. I think that as we go, you know, some students raised earlier, you know, that in the Congress it just seems like such a messy kind of deal. There's a lot of fighting and people are arguing, and doesn't that really make it difficult to serve? Well, the answer is probably so. But at the same time, it's probably not that much different than at any other point in our history. But the difference can be if we elect more women to Congress and just change the nature of the game, change the environment, change the opportunity for consensus building. And I think that we're going to see, even in New Jersey, I'm pretty convinced that New Jersey is going to send a woman to Congress in 2014. I won't say who she is, but we have been doing some heavy recruiting here in the great state of New Jersey. But I think that, I think in every, you know, when our region, in fact, in this entire region, I mean, there are a number of states that don't have a single woman in their state delegation in the Congress. In Maryland, in our House, I'm the only woman in our House delegation. And that comes on the heels of when I was first voting in Maryland, when I was 18 years old, we had 4 men and 4 women equally divided in the House of Representatives. And today, there's only 1 woman in the House of Representatives. And so we have real work to do. And that can make a huge difference in the way that we do our politics. I want to share with you just from across the country, as many of our colleagues have been going around the country talking about these issues of a women's economic agenda. During the State of the Union message, we were very proud because, you know, whenever you work on when a president is going to give a State of the Union, you always want to try to see if you can get a message in. And it turns out that the president actually got our message. When women succeed, America succeeds. He said that in the State of the Union message, and he's been saying it a lot lately. And ladies, I don't think it's an accident. I think it's because it's the truth. And so when the president has said this, what he's talking about is part of an economic agenda for women that is about empowering women, and that focuses on women's economic lives. Economic lives as entrepreneurs and inventors and innovators. Our economic lives in terms of the way that we raise our children and get our education. And I think that this year, in 2014, a lot has been made of what will happen in the elections, but I think that this year is actually going to be a year in which women's voices at the polls and women's voices in leadership will really be heard. Part of the rising American electorate is an electorate that is women. It's an electorate that's people of color. And that is the rising American electorate. It's an electorate of women who are like me, at least for a little bit of time, who are unmarried women, whether you're single or you're widowed or you're divorced. That is the new American electorate. And that electorate is going to speak during this election cycle. We saw it, women's voices. We heard those in the election for Virginia's governor when Terry McAuliffe was elected. He was elected by the power of women's voices. And that is what's going to happen, I think, in 2014. And I don't think it will be an accident, because I think that women will be voting for people who are concerned about their economic lives and opportunity. And the opportunity for those voices to be heard during this election cycle. As the chair of the recruitment committee for our Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, this year we've recruited, I think over 60% of our recruits are women in districts all across this country. And I think that that is what can happen, again, when women's voices are at the table. And then those women will bring a different set of ideas and a different way of working to the United States House of Representatives. And as I think some more, the stories that we've heard across the country, women speaking for themselves about what's important to them, women saying for themselves what they want in their communities. And that is, after all, what it means to have a woman's voice at the table. So many of those stories about mothers who want a nurturing environment for their children, so many of those stories about the trauma that women face when they go into a workplace and they realize that they don't have the opportunity to succeed that's the same as their male counterparts. And women are making these choices every day. And so it's why an economic agenda for women is so incredibly important. Lastly, I'll share with you that kind of on the politics, our young people, how many of you are actually are students here? Just raise your hands. So don't get discouraged, okay? Because politics is actually fun. And in big ways and small ways, you can actually get things done. And you don't always see those things on television. And in fact, I'm going to urge you to stop watching that television where you don't see those things. Because I think since I've come into Congress, and I had never held elective office before I ran for Congress, and I shared with the students earlier that when I ran, people told me that I should run for school board. They said I should run for county council. They said I should get an appointment of some kind. But nobody said, Donna, it would be okay if you ran for Congress. And in fact, when I told them that I wanted to run for Congress, they kept telling me all the reasons that I couldn't do it. And they said, well, if you haven't held elective office before, then you can't be in Congress. Well, that's not true. They said, well, the person who has the office currently is part of the machine, and you can never really beat the machine. And I said, well, I don't really believe that either. But it took me a while to get there. And finally, when I arrived in the Congress, I realized that all of the things there are to be done for people in my congressional district, and this is true, I think, for so many members of Congress, but especially for women, that they are things that may not ever be on television. They are things that may never be celebrated in the newspapers, but they are things that make a difference in people's lives. And there have been study after study about the effectiveness of women members of Congress compared to our male colleagues. Let's just say we do it better, we get more done, and we bring more money back to our districts. And so I'll just leave you with this. When I first came into the Congress, I knew that there were a lot of children in my district who were going to school every day hungry. And they were going home at night hungry. And it was masked because there were so many people who were doing so well. 2-income earner families, big houses, people doing very, very well. But there were a group of young people who every single day, and we were asking them to pay attention in math and science when they were hungry. And I knew as a member of Congress that I can't pay attention to anything if I'm hungry for an hour. So how could we expect these young people to learn in an environment where they were hungry? And so when I came into Congress, I found out that there was this program called the After School Suppers Program. I didn't know anything about it. I always thought you just get breakfast and lunch if you qualified. And so I found out about the After School Suppers Program, and there was a little appropriations bill that was going through, and I got a little line in that appropriations bill that allowed Maryland children to receive suppers if they qualified for breakfast and lunch. And it passed, and it was signed into law, and now millions of meals have been served to children in the after-school suppers program. Now that was never in the paper, in the news, or anything, but every time I go and visit a school, and I see, or an aftercare program, and I see those suppers being provided, I know exactly what happened, and I know exactly how it happened. And so when you hold elective office, it has to be about serving your community. And I think that women find ways to serve that are maybe a little bit different, maybe getting there not in quite the same way, but doing it in a way that makes a difference for real people who have real lives and real struggles in their communities. And so thank you very much for having me. I am just itching to take questions. And we have, I think there are a couple of microphones. There's one right here. There's one back in the back. And so if you have a question, the microphone will come to you. And then when it does, you can ask a question. Just raise your hand right here.
Hi, my name is Lillian Crowley. I'm the New Jersey coordinator for United for Equality. I want to thank you for being a co-sponsor of HJR 113, which will eliminate the deadline on passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. Since I know you know how important that is, I'd like you to share your feelings on that with some of the younger women here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and thanks for your work. You know, when I was growing up and in college, it was all the rage to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment. When I was in college, we knew what it was, we knew what had to be done. And then we went through this like gap period. And we never talked about it, and we didn't work on it. And thanks to our colleague in the Congress, Carolyn Maloney, she has really kept the issue alive. And for young women, I think it's easy to think that just by law, by statute, by practice, that we have equal rights under our Constitution. But the fact is that we don't. And so I hope that what young women will gain and revive this fight, because it is going to take young women to revive this fight and this struggle for equal rights, is to encourage your members of Congress to sign on to the Equal Rights Act so that we can move it through the House of Representatives, so that we can make sure that it goes through, as it should, through all of the state legislatures and become part of our constitutional expectation for women. So thanks for your work. This is a very quiet room. Not at all like the floor of the House.
Hi, my name is Deb Huber. I'm state president of National Organization for Women. I'm asking what we can do about a problem we have for the rights of women in New Jersey. There are some protesters outside a clinic that provides full-service reproductive health care. And not only do they harass the women on the way into the clinic, regardless of what they're going there for, they call them baby killers, they call them murderers. They take their picture. They take pictures of the escorts, and they post the pictures on the internet with the label of baby killer and murderer. What can we do to protect the rights of the women who are going to the clinic and the rights of the escorts not to be targeted this way? Thank you.
Well, I'm going to leave that to the legislators in New Jersey, with the expectation that it's going to take a lot of advocacy on the part of the citizens of New Jersey to offer the law enforcement and other protections that women need at clinics. What I will say from the federal perspective, I mean, I worry that, and I will say this particularly to young women as well, that I came out of college and into the workplace fully expecting that I would have the full rights of my reproductive health care choices. It was an expectation. And I think, again, maybe, I think some of us may have gone to sleep for a while. But we have been fully awakened over these last several years, recognizing how fragile our reproductive health care rights are and how much under assault they are. I mean, we've seen that now coming both from the Supreme Court and we've seen it coming out of Congress. I don't even know that I can count how many times we've tried to defund Planned Parenthood, that we've tried to take away, to repeal portions of the Affordable Care Act that have to do with women's reproductive health. I think we've actually had 52 votes to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, and most of those have been around the reproductive health care provisions of the Affordable Care Act. And so I think there are some things, obviously, in the Congress that we can do to try to defend our reproductive rights. I think the administration, in terms of its implementation of the Affordable Care Act, has been very aggressive in making certain that we preserve and implement those provisions. But it's going to take the good people of the state of New Jersey and Maryland and others where these actions take place to make sure that people are fully protected in exercising their rights and their freedoms at clinics.
Congresswoman, I'm Alma Sarabi, and on behalf of the other members of the Wynona Lipman Chair Group, I thank you for being here this evening. Many people say that Lyndon Johnson was the master of the Senate. I say that Senator Lipman was the master of the New Jersey Senate through her extraordinary effort in getting bills through. Would you speak to us a little bit about the reality of what it takes? Get a bill up in committee, get the votes, get it through the system. I think whatever perceptions there is from TV, you and I know the reality of what it takes, and I'd be interested in your perspective on how women working in a bipartisan way and why and how it's impacted in Congress and how important you think it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And what a great question. I mean, I think that, today the politics are a little bit more complicated. So when Connie Morella, I think, was here not long ago, and Connie Morella was a congresswoman from Maryland. She represented me for a very, very long time. And as a Republican in our delegation, she really struggled, frankly, within her party. She was a moderate Republican. She represented that district incredibly, incredibly well. And she was our champion on the Violence Against Women Act when it was reauthorized, I think, the second time. She worked with John Conyers to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, and it sailed through. No opposition at all. That was a very different time in the Congress. I think the more Republican women who are able to be elected to Congress, I think that would serve all of us well. My experience in our bipartisan caucus is that it's been very complicated to find issues on which we can work together, but we have found some. Earlier I was asked about this, and there's been so much written about how horrible it is for Congress members to travel, and when they travel, maybe they're junkets and those sort of things. But my experience with congressional travel has been this. Traveling with, for example, a group of bipartisan women to Afghanistan, in particular with Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who's the highest ranking woman in the Republican leadership. We came back from that because of our common experience together, because of what we saw, because of the seriousness of the plight of Afghan women, committed to making certain that we could do something in Congress to address those issues. And we did that together. But we did it because we finally got an opportunity to get to know each other and to work together. And the result was that we created an Afghan Women's Task Force that has worked to raise the issues surrounding Afghan women's education, maternal health care, and a whole range of other things that really is making a difference to the people of Afghanistan. It's not military, it's not part of the sort of defense apparatus, but it's really making a difference in women's lives. We would not have been able to do that had we not been able to go together and share a common experience and come to the same conclusion together about what would make a difference. I think that there are fewer opportunities like that in the Congress, and that there need to be more. I described earlier my experience with Jamie Herrera Butler in a very small way on the Violence Against Women Act. And I think we see these small victories in a way, but we need to have bigger victories. And we need to have bigger victories on big stuff. And I think it's going to take more women. I'm always looking to, add more Democratic women to our ranks. And I know that there are a group of Republican women who are looking specifically to add Republican women to their ranks. That will change the nature of the game. It just will. The congressional schedule also doesn't contribute to getting more things done together. We spend increasingly more time away from Washington, away from each other, away from work on our respective committees than we ever have before. And I don't think that that's been helpful to create an environment in which we can work together.
Hi, my name is Jamie. I'm a sophomore in a women and gender studies and psychology major. So I'm pretty much turned off to government and politics because I don't really like the role that big corporations play in it. So my question is, how can women transform a corrupt and patriarchal institution such as the government?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, I mean, I think you hit on something, and one is the role of money in politics. We've got to get the money out. The big money, the money that's driven by things other than participation in good governance. I've been a longtime proponent of public financing of elections. I am absolutely committed. I believe that if we don't own our elections, then somebody else does. And in this environment, given the Supreme Court's recent decisions, somebody else owns our politics. And I think it's understandable that you might be turned off by that. But let me just give you a shot, okay? And at maybe getting turned on. Because I do think that your voice is needed. Your voice is exactly the voice that's needed in government and politics. Exactly the voice. Whether it's a voice that's on, a staff of a member of Congress or some other legislative body, or whether it's running for office yourself. And so it's not enough, and it's not enough for good citizens to just back out of the process because it's a little messy. It would be better if you would mow yourself right into the process because you want to make it better. And I think that you can. And I think that this generation has the capacity to do that in a way that we may not have had for a while. And so I want to actually challenge you and encourage you to get in the game and to change the system. Let's change the environment. If there's too much bad money in politics, then let's rise up and get it out of there. Let's say to the United States Supreme Court, you know what? We know that you have decided that Congress doesn't have any authority to regulate the money and the expenditures in campaigns or how much one individual can spend on campaigns, but let's give Congress the authority by changing the Constitution to do that. See, I feel empowered to do that because I know that that's going to make a difference for my communities. When you think of the fact that with the Supreme Court's recent decision, that basically about 664 people contribute over $95,000 in a campaign. 664 people out of 350 million people. 110 people contribute more than $1 million in a campaign. 110 people. There's something fundamentally wrong about that. And so I just want to encourage you to take it on, and for this generation to take it on to change that. Because then that opens up the space for you and for others to run for office and to bring your good ideas to the table and not run the risk that they're going to be drowned out just because somebody else has a little bit more money. So get in the game.
Hi,
Hi.
Congresswoman Edwards. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here in New Jersey. My name is Charlene Dow Edwards. I'm from Trenton. I live in Trenton, New Jersey. And my question is regarding criminal justice reform. And I'm wondering, in your bipartisan women's caucus, that's a real family issue because, as we know, without prison reform, our families will never get back together. And I understand that Senator Rand Paul and the Libertarians, they have some interest in criminal justice reform. And I'm wondering, will we see any movement on that in the Congress? Thank you.
Well, good question. I mean, I think that there are issues like that where there actually is some room from the left, way left, to the right. Part of it is because we're being driven by a system where more and more people are incarcerated, but it doesn't really have any negligible effect or other on real crime. And you know, where people coming out of incarceration are then saddled so that they can't get into the economy. And so I think that, you know, when I've heard Senator Paul, and before him, former Senator Jim Webb, the same, you know, had the same bent that we have to do something to reform the system. Now, I can't say that there's been any real movement, though, to do that in terms of legislative action, but I do think it's an important new conversation that's opened up, and it may offer some opportunity for us to work across some of these lines.
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go.
Oh, hi.
Hi, I'm Diane Sayre, and I actually am a candidate in the Democratic primary for Congress in the 5th CD, and I appreciate very much what you said about your race for Congress. Okay. I also am an associate of Keisha Rogers, who you may be familiar with, a LaRouche Democrat in Texas, who may end up winning the primary, calling for the impeachment of Obama, largely because he's following in the footsteps of Cheney on the war policy, the torture, and one very important policy that I wanted to ask you about, which I think, given your committees, which is fracking. This is an extremely destructive policy. We have severe drought in Texas and California. Fracking uses enormous amounts of...
Yeah, what
Okay.
question?
Yeah, the question I have, because I was at a seminar in DC on deep sea drilling, et cetera, is that can the Democratic Party distinguish itself by fighting for policies like FDR and JFK? I think there should be a moratorium on fracking. I'd like to know your position on that. And then alternatively, the development of nuclear power for desalination, for irrigation, for actually addressing some of these crises.
That's a lot of questions. Let me just make it really clear. I don't support the impeachment of President Obama. I think these issues come up around fracking, our nuclear policy, our energy policy, and our science committee. We've held actually quite a few hearings in our science committee on fracking. I think that we all need just like a lot more information. I think at a minimum, I want to know what what materials are being used in the process and what their impact is, really what their impact is on the environment. And I think there, between our science committee and our energy and commerce committee, there are a lot of jurisdictional issues in terms of what Congress may or may not do. And of course, as you know, because you're running for Congress, that the majority in the Congress are Republicans right now. So in the House of Representatives, it's the majority party that determines what is going to come out of the Congress or not. We don't have the gavel.
So much, Congresswoman, for gracing us. My name is Dr. Denalery Johnson Fennell, and my question is actually on behalf of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, representing over 125,000 women. We want to know what we can do to help. What are some tangible results that we can do on a grassroots level? We've talked about anti-poverty and human relations and so forth, but what do you need from us?
Well, thanks. And Zeta Phi Beta, if you all don't know, is one of the best service organizations. I know there are Deltas and others in the room too, but just in terms of your mission for service. And so thanks very much for your work. I think there are a lot of things that you can do. I mean, government doesn't do everything. I mean, we can set, especially at the federal level, we can set a framework, but it's actually up to people in communities to do stuff. So, for example, one of the things that your sorority does, which I think is very helpful, is you offer mentorship opportunities for young men and for young women. You offer yourselves up as mentors in sometimes very, very distressed areas and communities. This is really important because sometimes when young people actually see the examples, and especially young women, when young women see the example of other women, they model it. They model it. And they model it in business, they model it in politics, they model it in education. And so those kind of things are actually really important. And then I think you have to make your voices heard. I spent many years before I came into Congress as an advocate. And in some ways, I mean, in many ways, I am still an advocate. I don't want to lose that because I'm always trying to figure out what's the organizing strategy, right? Who needs to be turned on? Who needs to be challenged? I want people in my community to challenge me and nudge me, and so I don't mind it when somebody shows up at a town hall meeting and asks a very challenging question. I don't mind it if I get a letter from somebody in my congressional district that puts me on the line and on the spot, and those are all things that you can do that are about challenging your elected officials to meet the mark. And then you know what? Which one of you has thought about where you're going to serve? Which one of you has thought about what office you're going to run for? And don't wait for somebody to tap you on the shoulder, because if you do, you will be waiting for a very long time. All right, so do those. And I will tell you, when I ran for Congress, people, they just really, no one wanted me to run. And I was looking, and I shared with folks earlier that if I had waited to do all of the things that they wanted me to do, honestly, I would have been 80 years old before I got into the Congress. And so don't wait. No need to wait. I can't see who has the microphone, sorry.
My name is Letitia Cox, and I'm so happy to be here, and I congratulate you on what you accomplished, because it's very true that most people who haven't had some kind of elective experience don't go into Congress immediately. So you've done a wonderful thing, not only being a woman, but I guess for anyone. My question is, what do you attribute that to? What do you think were the most important aspects of support that allowed you to overcome those kinds of obstacles?
Well, the first layer of support was growing up in a family where we weren't allowed to even say that we couldn't do stuff. And we were encouraged and taught to believe in the things that we could do. In other words, to really believe in ourselves and our own ability to shape things and make a difference. Both my mom and my dad, were just really great parents and models for me. And then I watched, I'll tell you who I'm glad I never had to run against: my mother. I'm gonna tell you something. My mother, the best campaigner, the best on message, the best spokesperson, and so I feel like I learned those things from her. And she was a federal employee, and she was like a shop steward in her union. And so she felt her own leadership, and I think that she passed that on to us. And a notion of service, that it was part of our, whether we did it as a job or we did it as volunteers, that it was our responsibility to serve. And when I look back on the way I grew up, my dad was in the Air Force. He served in the Air Force for 30 years. We moved all over the place. I went to, I think, 14 schools when I was growing up. That's a lot of schools. And I think one of the things that I learned from that experience, I wasn't allowed to whine about it, about moving from one place to the other. In fact, I went to a completely different high school my senior year in high school. And part of what I learned is that there was never a room of strangers. Because if you had to spend time thinking that everybody was a stranger, the year would pass by and the next thing you know, you'd be moving someplace else. And so I learned immediately to walk into a room and to talk to people and find out about them and to develop a comfort zone. And those, it turns out, were all really, really good skills for being in Congress. Another good skill as a mom, I'm going to tell you something. I know how to organize. I know how to manage my time. I know how to get things done that really seem impossible. And I knew how to run a snack stand. Don't laugh. It's a very important skill. And I joke in a way about that, but all of us have things in our lives where, you know, we have to organize and manage other people and juggle things and get to know people and try to convince them to, you know, serve on that snack stand when you don't want them. And all of those things were skills that enable me to serve in Congress. And then I went to school and I learned. And I went to law school actually late because I started out, I was a systems engineer working in the space program, and then the Challenger disaster happened and our programs ended. And it was at that point that I actually decided to renew a dream that I had of going to law school. And when I went to law school, I learned a completely different way of thinking. And those skills help me as a member of Congress now. I read everything that comes across my desk about every single issue that you can imagine. And the one good thing about being in Congress is that you can truly become a Jacqueline of all trades because you can learn so many different things about so many different things. And so I spend a lot of time in my day reading and having the ability to, decipher information and then translate that information so that other people understand it. During the healthcare debate, I know that some members of Congress got accused of not reading the bill. I did. I read it. In fact, I took it home, I think over 4th of July or some holiday, and I read it on the beach. But when I did, I learned things that were in there so that when I was hearing all the noise going on, I didn't believe it, and I talked about it in a different kind of way. And in fact, in healthcare, one of the provisions in the Affordable Care Act is a provision that allows state insurance commissioners to challenge the premium increases that insurance companies offer. That is a provision that I authored. And the reason I did was because I had read the bill and realized that that was one thing for people who already have insurance that we were not protecting. And I thought that the insurance companies would do the same thing that the credit card companies did when we changed the law on credit card bills. They increased interest rates and things like that. And I thought, well, why wouldn't insurance companies do the same thing with healthcare insurance? And so I advocated with our leaders to put that provision into the healthcare law. And as a result, insurance companies have had to return millions of dollars across the country to consumers as a result of that provision. And so I think all of those things then become skills that you learn, and each of us, no matter where you serve, whether it's on your local school board or your town council or wherever it is that you serve, I think each of us brings skills to the table that come from our life experience, that come from our work experience, that come from doing things like, raising a family and paying bills. And it's actually good in politics to have that mix of all of the different experiences that we bring to the table. And to the young lady's question about here and concern about government and about serving in government, I would say that if we're missing your voice around that table, then we're not as fulfilled as we should be in our legislative policy. And that is why I worry about money in politics, that if money becomes so dominant in politics right now, members of Congress having to raise, or people wanting to be in Congress having to raise, $4 million, $5 million, to run for a House seat, or, tens of $millions to run for the Senate, that we're going to come to a point where we're not going to get all of the diversity of voices and experiences in our politics that we need, because not everybody has friends who can give them millions of dollars to run for Congress. I think we'll take one more question, and then we'll release everybody so you can go home.
Sorry.
Very much. My name is Dr. Lena Gould. I'm the founder of Diversity in Nurse Anesthesia and Mentorship Program. I'm a certified registered nurse anesthetist as a profession. And I only bring that up only because I always have to remember where I came from. I was a single mother on welfare, and I'll never forget the number. It was $273 of public assistance that I received, $114 of food stamps that I received. But it was through the Education Opportunity Fund program when I was a student at Fairleigh Dickinson University that got me through. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts about the workforce diversity, particularly in the healthcare professions?
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that, because I think there's so many of us who have experiences that we bring to the table, and just because you start one place doesn't mean that that's the place that you have to end. And I think it's important for us to remember that in public policy. And when you were talking, I was thinking, I wanted some of my colleagues to be standing right here so that they could know what the impact of cutting $145 billion from Pell Grants would mean to young people who need those grants to go to school, or what it would mean to cut K-12 programs so that our young people can't fulfill their dreams, or what it means not to provide for people who have to reinvent themselves in the workplace because we have a 21st century that requires a different set of skills than the 20th century. And something has to, it's okay for government to provide that, to get people over the hump, so that then, they're working and they're paying taxes and they're contributing in a completely different way. Those, I think, are the obligations of government. And I want to have the debate once and for all in this country about the kinds of things that government can do to provide a framework, and then all of the other things that all of us are so willing to do so that we can make that work to be able to contribute and to just do what most families want to do. Most people don't want to be like, rich beyond compare. You know what they want? They want to get up in the morning, go to a decent job that pays them a decent wage, come home, take care of their children, send their kids off to school, have them move out of the house. That's it. And then live in retirement. And I would say that last remark is probably for me, the mom. My son has moved out of the house, but it's a good feeling. Listen, thank you all very much for having me today.